as Sarah Bagley here in the city of Alexandria, and I'm joined by my co-host, Councilman Kirk McPike.
Hello, it's really great to be here. Excited to be talking with you about some of the great things that we have going on here in Alexandria. This is our first podcast, so welcome to all of the millions of people, which is amazing because Alexandria only has 160,000 residents, but so many people around the world clearly want to hear what
Not
we're
after we
doing.
annex Shirlington. Then we'll add in a few more.
Yeah, we're really supposed to keep that stuff to executive session, Sarah.
Well, we're happy to have all of you. Kirk and I are both in our second terms here on the Alexandria City Council, and we decided a podcast might be a fun new way to share information with residents. Those of you who are familiar with the former mayor's tomes that were published monthly, and our new mayor, Aaliyah Gaskins, has her own council report that she publishes. And Kirk and I thought it would be a great idea to enter the podcast scene with another way to update you on the three meetings that happen each month. So we're going to be diving into episode 1 with our February meetings.
Yep. We're also going to be talking about some other things that are happening in the city, give you a look ahead at what's coming up in the next few weeks here in Alexandria. And in future episodes, we even hope to have the opportunity for you to email us in some questions, take some time to answer those, and to have guests on the show so that we can introduce you to some of our colleagues, to some of the officials who help run this wonderful city.
Yes, that's true. And so let us know who you'd like to hear from, and we'll try to bring in some people who can help expand on and comment on all the things we vote on and talk about at these meetings. So, with that, I will dive in to introduce what was our first legislative meeting in February, held on the 18th of the month. Our first legislative meeting of the month is always on a Tuesday, and we also at that meeting address board and commission vacancies. For those of you sort of new to the city, we're a big fan of boards and commissions here in Alexandria, having somewhere between 80 and 200 of them, it feels like. But it's always exciting to appoint new members. And this month, one of the boards and commission positions that I'll highlight were actually some new members to our planning commission. The planning commission is one of our boards and commissions that is actually a creature of state law. They are the first step for any special use permit, for any DSUP, and for land use issues in the city. They take public comment, they hold hearings, and they hear from applicants, residents, and staff. And so it's quite a work intensive position. The people who serve in those roles give quite a bit of time to the city. And we recently had two members cycle off after serving our city for 10 years, which we really appreciate and thank them for their service to our planning commission. So we went through those appointments. Often, many of them are uncontested. So if you're interested in a board and commission appointment, keep an eye out on those vacancies. You can find them on alexandriava.gov under boards and commissions. We also talked about, on a related note, our new stipend for youth members to our boards and commissions. We recognize as a council in our last budget that many of our youth often have to choose between paid employment to help support their families, to help put gas in their cars, to pay for snacks and things. And we wanted a board and commission experience to not have to lose out on those youth members because they, wanted to have that opportunity to earn a little bit for their families and for themselves. So we will, moving forward, be compensating the youth in those roles.
This was a budget amendment that was actually brought to me by residents who participate on boards and commissions. Members of the Children, Youth, and Family Collaborative Commission brought this to the council during last year's budget cycle. And we were able to, it wasn't a lot of money. It was just $5,000, but it was important that we make the policy decision to support these young people who are supporting our city. So I was really glad to have, I believe, your co-sponsorship on the budget amendment last year when we submitted it. And got it into the budget this year, and we released the funds just now. So yeah, as Sarah said, our boards and commissions are part of the heart of how we work in Alexandria, and the volunteers who work on them really drive our city forward. So please take an opportunity to join those boards and commissions. And when we have youth spots, encourage young people to join them so that and let them know that there's a bit of compensation, very small amount, for those young people who are giving up their valuable youthful time to help our city.
Certainly. And I serve on the Children, Youth, and Families Collaborative Commission as well. And it was great to hear them sort of come up with this idea as a way to promote youth participation. The other two major items that we talked about were the 2025 property tax assessments. Those were landing in mailboxes just over the last week or two. So if you own property in the city, you are familiar with this process. Every year, the our Office of Finance does a holistic analysis of property values in the city. They've actually won some awards for their
Hmm.
process, they told us during our meeting. So it's a very thorough process and it establishes the property values that we then mail to everybody, informing them of the assessments. There's no bill due yet. That bill
No,
comes later, but it is alerting people to any changes in the assessments. The bottom line is real estate values continue to go up in this city. It remains a really great place to live, and home and condo values continue to reflect that.
but it's not
Um,
rising evenly. Our
it is not.
commercial valuation actually went down 0.9% year over year. Commercial includes actually apartment buildings. That's something people don't realize, that because it is a commercial process of renting that home, we categorize that as commercial technically for the assessment of property. But and our apartment values were pretty flat this year. We saw some improvements in values in hotel properties, some other entertainment venue type properties, but office space was a big drag on our commercial property values this year, as has been regionally a challenge for many years now. So with residential up 4.6% and commercial down 0.9%, it all came out to about a 2.5% increase in property values citywide.
Which again is good news in terms of we remain a great place to live, we remain a great place to invest and to own a home and to own property. Even if it's commercial property, it still has
Yes.
high value. So on the whole, as a city, the assessments were is a positive sign. It continues to be a positive sign. That
Yep.
said, it's not without caution and it's not without information for us as we move into budget season, not to preview upcoming meetings. There was also a brief discussion about the fact that our average single family home price topped $1 million. That was an interesting piece of the conversation. My colleague here, Kirk McPike, asked about the median, and we did get that number, which is much lower. Kirk, do you have that exact figure?
I believe it was around $680,000 for the median home, and that might be inclusive of single family homes and condos.
Hmm.
The single family home average was $1 million this year, which does make the math easy on determining the tax that average house will pay. But yeah, that was a a slow but steady growing of our property values over the last few years. Now pushed that single family home up to $1 million. The average condo is worth $447,000 in the city.
It's interesting to note that condos really have become the entry point for many
Hmm.
people into the home market. So it's an important part of the market to pay attention to.
The first home I purchased in the city was a condo. You live in a condo.
I do.
It's a great way to live in Alexandria, and I don't know. I love my home. I love living in a condo though. I took a little bit of sense of safety in knowing if anything ever happened, if I screamed really loud, I shared a wall with someone who might be able to help.
No, it's
Now I
true.
have to
There,
rely on my wonderful husband and beautiful beagle to take care of
to
that.
take care of you. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's why it's funny. I know what you mean exactly. There is some comfort in sort of neighbors, and my neighbors are pretty like less than a stone throw away. They're right across the hall here, and we certainly do. It's interesting. I just texted one of my neighbors today to say I'm going to be out of town when a package shows up. Can one of you please, bring it inside for me? So that's one of the perks of condo living. The last thing that we talked about, kind of speaking of living in the city, is the interdepartmental long range work plan, also known as the plan for planning. And this is the process by which planning and zoning envisions and lays out. Is it what do they call that kind of chart that we saw where there's different colors moving left to right? Is that a Gantt chart?
I don't
Um,
I just call it the spreadsheet
the
because it is a
spreadsheet.
spreadsheet,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
Where the coloration gets darker as we move from concept to public
exactly.
consideration to council action. So
Exactly. But I think that somebody referred to it as a specific kind of chart. So now I'm going to have to Google it. Listener, if you're Googling right now, send it in and let us
yeah.
know what that chart is called. But we went over the plan to planning. This wasn't a voting item, but it was sort of their presentation of their current plan of what they're going to plan over the next 2 years. And it really is a great overview of the major projects in the city, both ones led by planning and zoning, but also how they interact with transportation and environmental services, with recreation and parks, with ACPS, with general services, with Department of Project Implementation. Kirk, do you want to touch on some of the highlights from that work plan?
Yeah, you had the Duke Street Corridor Plan, which we voted on as a council about a year and a half ago, but a couple of times actually.
Yeah.
We've last session is moving forward. It is relying upon substantial grants from the federal government, so there is some uncertainty right now on how that project will advance. But I think that that's a good one to call out because a lot of times we get asked how policy is made in the city. Something comes before council, people are like, wow, where did this come from? Well, where it came from was this long range planning interdepartmental work plan. Items get on this document because problems are identified or the council identifies a priority like housing development. If you were to look at this plan 3 years ago, you would have seen the zoning for housing initiatives on this plan. They ended up on that plan a couple of years before that when it was raised by council that we wanted to take a real swing at addressing our housing crisis. So as policies move through the process in Alexandria, they show up in this document. So this is an interesting conversation to watch when the council has it before us once a year, but it's also an interesting document to look at because you can get a sense of what your council is going to be talking about going into the future. So it's part of how we transparently take an idea from a memo that comes from a member of council or an issue that is raised by a safety inspector or a resident to city staff that becomes a part of this plan, that becomes an item that staff is working on, that becomes an item that's reported back to council for advice and sort of shaping, and then eventually becomes something that shows up at one of these meetings and then goes to the public hearing for final consideration. So it's how we make the sausage here in Alexandria.
Exactly. And if you want a preview of the sort of things that council will be talking about over the next 2 years, it's a great place to go and look at that. And for example, things like the Landmark Mall redevelopment
Mm-hmm.
plan, that's part of it.
The city
We
hall
also,
redevelopment.
City Hall redevelopment is on there. We have Cameron Run Regional Park Study. It touches on really all elements of living in the city: roads, parks, housing development,
The
housing
waterfront
master plan.
sewer
Yeah.
system improvements, everything.
Yeah,
Yeah.
green building policy. So it will not only tell you the kinds of things that our staff is working on, but also will give you a forecast as to when you can expect it to finish its community engagement phase, to come before council, to be voted on by council. So it's a nice preview of the work ahead in the next 2 years. And we will get a final chance to vote on that plan, I think, in a few more months. I think they
Yeah.
preview it for us. And then when do they bring it back?
Doesn't it usually come back in June? Is that
I
right?
think it comes back before the end of the fiscal year. So
Oh,
either
that's
May or June.
yeah, yes. I think we have the budget dominating work over the next 2 months, and then it'll be either that last bit of May, early June. We'll see it for final consideration, and we give it an imprimatur, a stamp of approval. It doesn't mean anything in there won't change because this is a planning document, and many of these projects have changed and been reshaped over the years as fiscal conditions in the city, council priorities, or public input have weighed upon them.
So that were the major highlights from our first legislative meeting in February. It was the other thing I'll note about that meeting is it was what the fourth time that this new council had all met together, and I think we're starting to find the rhythm. We didn't get
Yes.
a chance to record this podcast in January. There's quite a few things going on, and we were getting settled in. But what you'll find is that I think this group is finding a rhythm. Our mayor is finding her space on the dais, and it really felt like a productive, good time together, a good legislative meeting. And so I was excited about the momentum we were building heading into our public hearing.
Right. So if you look at the back end of our first legislative meeting of each month, you'll see some ordinances and things like that that we vote on, but they don't actually get approved then. They actually are being voted on to be heard at the public hearing, which is always either the Saturday after the first meeting or the Saturday after that if a holiday of some sort intervenes. This year, it was supposed to be two Saturdays, but it ended up being one because a snowstorm intervened on the first meeting which was supposed to be, I think, the 11th and got moved to the 18th.
Mhm.
And it's kind of interesting. We vote to accept the assessments, and then the next day they get mailed out to residents. This year, they got mailed out on time because that's scheduled, but we hadn't actually voted to accept them until the following week. So, eh,
Well,
it all comes out, it all evens out in the wash.
it did work out in the end, although it would have been a boon to the postal service if we had to redo all those mailings, if we'd changed anything about the assessment process. So
Yes, yes.
that's all right. But yeah, so at least that worked out. We did accept them.
And then we moved into our public hearing. And at this month's public hearing, we had the same sort of things that we always have. We have an opportunity for the public to come and speak. It's not like our city council town halls. They don't ask us questions and we answer them. They just share their opinions with us on whatever issues are on the top of their mind. And then after they have spoken to us on their concerns, we move into a series of different items. First are the planning commission items. These are items that have actually gone to the planning commission that Sarah mentioned earlier during the boards and commissions discussion, have been considered by planning, sometimes amended by planning, because planning is a quasi-legislative body in our system, and then referred to us for final consideration and approval. And then the second thing are the ordinances that I mentioned coming to us out of that first legislative meeting. Everything that gets passed at a public hearing is getting its second hearing and an opportunity for the public to speak on it. It's just sometimes the first hearing is with the planning commission and sometimes that first hearing is with the city council. So we had some interesting projects that came before us. We had a conversion project at 628 King Street, which is taking the second floor of basically office space there at on King Street and converting it into 11 small apartments. These are studios and one bedroom apartments. They're going to be some of the most affordable apartments in the city, and they're right here at the intersection of basically every kind of transit that we
Yeah.
offer in Alexandria. Buses, bike lanes, and trains, all within walking distance. It is the urbanist dream
Yes,
right
as well as
there.
the Tate. Talk about the
Yeah,
urbanist dream.
yes.
If you've ever dreamed of living in a former Banana Republic, now's your chance. I think that was the spot of the Gap and the Banana Republic in a
I
few
believe
iterations
so.
ago.
Yes.
Yeah. And so I think upstairs had maybe the menswear was upstairs.
Yeah.
But
And
go ahead.
is this catty corner from where the convent is going in? Remember that came to us like a year ago? Anyway, housing is going into Old Town. It's kind of a variety
Yes,
of types.
yes, yes.
And this is going to be one of them right here. And is there anything else interesting about this project, Sarah?
Well, for those of you who are looking for a multimodal way of living, this is your chance to live in a building without any parking.
Yeah.
And so I think this is an opportunity that they have asked the council. One of the elements that the council had to vote on was a parking reduction. Now,
Mm,
this doesn't mean an elimination of parking on site. What it means is that given the 11 units being created on site, our formula currently says that would require 9 parking spaces to be provided. But what the council voted to do was say we're going to reduce and effectively eliminate that parking requirement in recognition of the significant availability, walkability, bikeability, trolley, bus, and the metro station nearby. And maybe someday when the water taxi picks up again, taking the water taxi. And so these will be 11 apartments. And as Kirk mentioned, they are going to be priced naturally affordable for people earning between 60, 80, and 100% of AMI. So this is your 60,000, 80,000, $100,000 a year incomes, which are still significant, but are much more affordable if you're in that range naturally. And I think it's pretty exciting. And I think I'm envious of those who will get to have this experience living right there in the middle of our King Street corridor.
Yeah. This is obviously an issue that we've talked a lot about. Every time a major project comes to us, it often comes with this parking reduction because parking costs money. So when you're trying to build units that are going to be affordable to people just by their very nature, at lower incomes, you have to look at who's going to be living there, what kind of services are they going to be accessing, and how are they going to access them. So sometimes in places like Old Town, in places like the Eisenhower corridor, where we have a metro station right there next to some very large residential buildings, we have these significant reductions in parking, and it's not that unusual. In fact, the city of Richmond, Virginia, eliminated parking minimums from its requirements for new construction about a year and a half ago. And that doesn't mean there's not parking going into Richmond. It just means that the city is not mandating a city chosen number of parking spaces for every building that goes in. It's allowing the market to help decide that and help. It's one of the ways that you can adjust what you're offering to try to fit the affordability that you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, and to allay concerns for anybody who's a neighbor to that building or lives in the area, you wonder those residents will not get residential parking permits, so they won't be
Right.
on the street taking up spots. But instead, the builder and the developer will be sharing information about should you own a car, where the garages are nearby, that you can rent a space, where the other opportunities are to sort of store that vehicle. So understandably, some people may have a vehicle, they'll just keep it in a garage 2 blocks down and use it on those infrequent occasions when they need to pull it, to go and pull that out. But speaking of moving, how about the move of the George Mason polling place?
Excellent segue for the first episode. You're just a natural. Yes, if you vote at George Mason Elementary School, you will not be voting at George Mason Elementary School for the next little while because the school is going to be undergoing a major renovation. So your polling location is now Trinity United Methodist Church. So until you hear otherwise from the city, until you get another postcard saying go back to George Mason, you're going to vote at Trinity United Methodist Church. So it was a small thing that we had on the docket. We have to vote to do it because it not only changes the location of the precinct, it technically changes the name of the precinct temporarily. And it's important that we do it in public to get the word out to residents who might vote in that area. We also want to get the word out about the fact that there are going to be new options for shopping and food in the Chiralagua neighborhood. Isn't that right, Sarah?
Well, it is. And again, lovely segue, sir. We're really mastering this handoff here. So in responding to a local need, it and part of something that grew out of the small area plan work that was done in
Mm-hmm.
this neighborhood, actually award-winning small area plan work done in this neighborhood, there was a recognition that street vendors were a part of the community. They were a way to get access to fresh foods. They were a way for people to essentially operate small businesses. But awkwardly, they didn't fit into any sort of identifiable category of
Mm-hmm.
within the city and within the state's structure to license them and to monitor them. And so, rather than simply eliminate what is enjoyed and appreciated and valuable to some members of that particular community and that neighborhood. We worked with our planning and zoning office, worked with them to establish a street vendor program that will essentially carve out a special area, getting them off the sidewalk, which was recognizing, we need pathways through the sidewalks, we need accessibility. Brick and mortar owners need people to be able to get in and out of their stores. So we're going to be creating designated spaces on the street, not that different from our parklet program, our street dining programs, and we will be effectively licensing these vendors in those spaces and allowing them to sell certain products that now do fit within the constraints of state law and regulated products, and will be funding a position that will help monitor, license, communicate, and educate the neighborhood and the vendors about the program.
Yeah, I thought it was really nice that at the public hearing, basically the only person who came to speak was the attorney for the shopping center directly adjacent to where these vendors are going to be able to take up a little bit of space and offer their wares. This is the shopping center. The shopping center is not renting this space to these vendors. The shopping center is not getting any revenue from it, but they came to show their support for it because they recognize that this is something that is desired by the community. This is something that serves the market and sort of helps their businesses by creating more vitality and energy in that area. So it's nice to see, a spirit of sharing in a situation like this. Speaking of sharing, sometimes people in the city like to share a room in their house or perhaps their ADU with people coming to Alexandria for a short period of time, which we often call Airbnbs and short-term rentals. And the last thing that we considered, the last major thing we considered at the public hearing was new regulations and rules in Alexandria. The first regulation and rules we've ever had in Alexandria for our short-term rental providers.
Yeah, I think this is a topic that the council has been talking about actually for quite a while and was finally prepared after a lot of community engagement, a lot of
Mm-hmm.
interactions with key civic associations, with the sort of short-term rental business community. There was a lot of feedback there from many different sources and from individual residents, from impacted neighbors. And our staff really tried to weigh both the business benefit that the city does get. I think approximately 19% of our transient tax, which is
Mm-hmm.
essentially like our hotel tax, came via short-term rentals in 2024. It was $3 million roughly
Yep.
that we did earn. I mean that the city did earn from these rentals. So there's a recognition that there is a market for this, but at the same time, it's a very small piece of our housing market. It's less than 1% of our 83,000 housing units in the city, 80,000 housing units in the city.
Something around that.
It,
Yeah, it's in my notes. Let me find
yeah.
it.
I'll let Kirk fact check me in real time here. Um, but I do believe it was 0.8% of our
Yes.
housing stock is registered as a short-term rental. And when I say registered, I also mean that our city uses a host of methods to find, identify, and discern, including searching sites like Airbnb and Verbo and other things like that to find when people list them. So what this arose out of was a recognition that it was impacting our community, but it also had a positive role to play. And so how could we allow the good actors to continue to exist, provide this form of short-term housing to visitors to the city, but also regulate them in a way that protected the quality of life for our long-term residents in the city. Um, Kirk, do you want to speak to some of the specific elements?
Yeah, what this package of rules did is it really brought Alexandria in line with some of our surrounding jurisdictions. Arlington, Fairfax, Washington, D.C. have all had policies that sort of lightly regulate the use of homes or ADUs for Airbnbs. For many years, Alexandria was kind of the last bit of the Wild West out here. So we put some occupancy limits in place. So basically, under the new rules, for every bedroom that a home has, there can be two guests who can stay there, plus two guests just generally. So if you think of a three-bedroom house being rented out as a Airbnb, that's eight people who could stay at that house. A six-bedroom house, it's 10 people because we actually set a maximum on the number of people, excluding children under 3 years of age, who can be in an Airbnb or sorry, a short-term rental. There are a couple of different platforms at one time. So this will prevent crowding. This will address situations where you have a large house that gets converted into a short-term rental, and we had a lot of cars coming in and taking up all the area parking. There are a couple other rules about parking that Sarah and I actually worked with our colleagues to adjust slightly on the dais to make sure we felt that we weren't missing opportunities to have more flexibility for people who needed that to make sure that their short-term rental units actually complied with our law.
Mhm.
We also put in some limits on loud parties or events at short-term rental units in just purely residential zones. So people who come to stay at the Airbnb, they can enjoy themselves. They can have dinner outside. They can, have a party if they're there as part of a trip for a wedding or something like that. But they can't invite 100 people over. They can't have outsiders come in and turn it into a little bit of spring break right there on your street. Um, and we also stated that, look, there's going to have to be a guide that is available to anyone who comes and rents an Airbnb in our city. It's going to say, hey, here's the rules on occupancy, here's the rules on events, here's when Alexandria has expected quiet hours, and here are the details about cleaning up trash and how to park and get access to our incredible transit system here in the city. So just basically how to be a good guest in Alexandria. And we have put in place a complaint resolution process where
Mm-hmm.
a local agent or the operator needs to be available with the ability to respond within 1 hour to some serious complaints regarding noise, occupancy issues, things that are dangerous, but not every little thing that might come up, because we're not trying to run Airbnbs out of the city. We just want to make sure that we're achieving the right balance in terms of the benefits we get and the sort of impacts they have in the communities around them.
And if you want to learn more about the short-term rental regulations, you can find more information. And I'll drop, I think, our first reference to the city website, which is simply alexandriava.gov. And on that website, you can have links to our meetings. You'll see links to our docket. And the homepage really has been cleaned up quite a bit. I mean, I don't, for those of you who have lived here a while, our city website has not always been a shining beacon of clarity for finding local information, but there's been a lot of work done by our OCPI office and others to sort of make sure that that landing page really hits on the key issues that people might be coming to learn about. And so feel free to visit and learn a bit more about short-term rental regulations.
You can use the website to learn that OCPI stands for Office of Communication and Public Information. We use acronyms all the time.
Which
Did we say SUP earlier without
I,
explaining what a special
I
use
think I
permit
did.
is?
I think I
Yeah.
kicked off the podcast using multiple acronyms while talking about Planning Commission. We are nothing if not wonky, folks.
Yes.
Um, but no, it was a good that was sort of the last major item in that public hearing. And as Kirk mentioned, the small change that we sort of made from the dais was really in response in some ways to where we started at that public
Mhm.
hearing with 628 King Street. We'd had
Yep.
that dialogue about, the necessity of parking in our enhanced transit area, and the small tweak that Kirk and I worked together to make in the short-term rental regulation was just to make sure that we didn't have overly specific parking requirements for short-term rentals in the enhanced transit area, recognizing that having parking, within 500 feet or within some sort of arbitrary distance to the rental might not be necessary from if you with everything with all the access you have,
Right.
and that someone looking to rent a short-term rental in the enhanced transit area is much less likely to be parking a vehicle as well.
Yeah. And we didn't remove the requirement altogether. We
Right.
simply said that if they make every effort to identify a, parking solution in this enhanced transit area, but it just doesn't quite meet the specific requirements laid out in the ordinance, then the director of planning, who we mentioned earlier, Carl makes another appearance. He gets to make an assessment on whether it's a reasonable plan or not. So,
Yeah.
we have great staff. We often trust them to make these sort of edge case calls in the city, and we and a majority of our colleagues thought that was a appropriate approach here.
Yeah. And so the meeting wrapped up right around 12:30, I think, which is
Yep.
pretty par, I think, for a public hearing. And I mentioned that just to encourage people again, public hearings, you can sign up. We start taking our first speaker at 9:30 a.m. We take the first 15 speakers on any topic that you'd like to come in and talk about. Speakers get 3 minutes each. And then anybody who is 16 and later, they come back and we finish them up after we've covered our docket. And so we
Mm-hmm.
had a bit of that at this meeting, 15 at the front, and I think another 15 or so at the back end to round out that meeting. Um, And because of the snowstorm, our third meeting followed right after our public hearing on Saturday with our final third meeting, second legislative meeting of the month on the 25th. And this one was all about the Benjamins, baby. It was very heavy on the economic talk, very heavy on the budget talk. Um, and we got some, I'll kick off this conversation by saying that the announcement was made about our economic summit, which will be
Mhm.
taking place on the afternoon of May 8th. This is an item that one of our colleagues, Councilman John Taylor Chapman, has been talking about, not just in our last
For
budget cycle,
years.
but for years. And
Yes.
Kirk and I were very pleased to support his efforts to have an economic summit budgeted for in the FY25 year. And we're going to fit that in pretty much at the wire, having it in May. But we had our consultants in from TIP to talk about the lead up work that's going to happen for that summit. There's going to be surveys, roundtables, public engagement. So while the summit itself might be taking place on May 8th, there will be lots of opportunities to engage on the topic. And again, keep your eye out on the website, keep your eye out on Alexandria e-news, on our social media for your opportunity to participate. And the summit and is it's really a reflection of the fact something Kirk and I referenced earlier, talking about the difference in commercial values and real estate and residential values, is we really want to focus on raising and increasing the amount of our revenue in the city that is derived from commercial sources.
Yeah.
And this economic summit is all about how do we do that? How do we attract and retain and develop and support increased commercial growth in our city?
Yeah. It's important to know that commercial properties aren't assessed in the same way that residential properties are in Alexandria. When your residential property tax bill arrives, if you're someone who owns your home here in Alexandria, that bill is based upon the value of the land your home sits on and the value of the structure you live in itself. For the commercial property, it's those two items plus the economic activity that is generated at the property. So finding ways to look at the commercial spaces that we have and improve the vitality of the businesses that are there, bring more people to our city eating at our restaurants. It doesn't just improve our meals tax, it improves our property taxes. It's a positive cycle that just spins more money into our budget, which is less money that we're going to need to raise from residential property owners. So yeah, we started, I think, the economic summit discussion by discussing the 82 to 28 chart, so 82 to 18 chart. 82% of our revenues as a city come from residential properties if you include apartments in the residential category. 82% of our real estate taxes come from that. And I believe that we might have seen that chart again in the next item that we discussed in the third legislative meeting.
Well done, sir. Not only did we see that chart, but it was a major component of that presentation, which was
Yeah.
the city manager presenting his proposed FY26 budget. That happened Tuesday night, the 25th, and it was, to Jim's credit, he got it done just under an hour.
Yeah.
But it was a 49 slide or so, 39 slide or so presentation, going through current economic outlook, revenues, forecasting, the proposed operating budget, as well as the proposed CIP. And then he concluded by going over the budget process, which has about 500, 600 meetings in it, if I'm
Yeah.
remembering correctly.
I mean, if you round 19 up to the highest, to the closest 500, then yes, it has 500 items on it. But yeah, it's a lot, and that includes multiple public hearings about the budget, about the tax rate, about the add delete proposals that council will add over the course of this process, as well as our standard public hearings that happen at our regular Saturday meetings every month, as well as a public unveiling of the budget, which is actually happening tonight as we record this. Jim probably just wrapped up speaking with the public about his budget proposals. So there's a lot of opportunities for us to engage with staff, but also for you as residents of Alexandria to engage with us about what you want to see in this budget.
And
To
in
talk about,
terms, oh yeah, no,
no,
go
please, no, please, go ahead, go ahead.
So in terms of some of the opening items in the budget, one thing everybody is always very interested to hear is what is the city manager proposing in terms of any changes to the tax rate? And Jim led his discussion by making clear that this budget does not propose any change to our real estate property tax rate. The entire budget is envisioned to continue to strive to provide the services that we want to provide and need to provide to our residents within the current revenue generated by our real estate property tax rate. So his budget did not propose any increase, and he did not even provide at this stage an alternative, which he has done in years past, a base rate. And then if you were to change the rate, here is what else we would spend it on. So the city manager clearly indicated his desire to maintain that rate and to work within it, which did require, significant reprioritizations within our
Hmm.
CIP, and also efficiencies and certain evaluations of vacancies in our operating budget so that we could maintain within the limits of what our current revenue is generating.
Yeah.
So up next at a next council meeting, we'll be selecting the rate that we will advertise, and we'll talk about that after it happens. But leading into that, the manager's base budget went with the current real estate property assessment tax rate.
And it's
um,
important to consider that every service that we provide in Alexandria is subject to the same inflationary forces that your groceries are subject to, that home construction is subject to, that we're all subject to. It costs more money this year to provide the same park services, the same bus services, the same public safety services than it did last year. And the manager was able to obviously fit within the increased revenue that we're going to get from the assessments that we discussed earlier, but also our projected sales tax revenue, hotel tax revenue, without requiring more revenue on top of that to meet the growing cost of city services, even with the inclusion of some new services that the council has indicated that we'd like to see. And he did this by really looking hard in the books,
mhm.
working with every department, asking them to find cuts. What are jobs that are vacant that we're just never going to fill? Let's take that out of the budget. What are programs that have run their course that we can fold into something else, or that we're never actually going to do? Take those out of the budget. So he actually pulled $6.5 million basically out of what would be the budget in order to fit within the constraints that existed.
I would just add that the $6 million that he found to eliminate in this year's budget is part of a $32 million that has been
Yes.
removed over 5 years.
Yeah.
So, the city really looks to the city manager and to city council to demonstrate sort of fiscal responsibility. And while we have had the opportunity over the last 5 years to create and expand some services, there's also been an offset of $32 million worth of reallocated or eliminated items in the budget that have helped keep us in that sort of very fiscally responsible AAA bond rating that is so valuable to us.
Yeah.
Go
And
ahead, Kirk.
that bond rating is kind of everything. We have a AAA bond rating in Alexandria. That means that we get to borrow money at the lowest rate that a city of our size and fiscal sort of character can borrow at. We pay about 4.5% interest on the loans that we take out as a city. And if we were to ever endanger that rate by overspending or overcommitting ourselves on our capital improvement plan, which is our CIP, we would get dinged by the credit agencies. And the manager actually discussed the fact that if we went from a AAA to a AA credit rating, it would add $32 million to what we'd be projected to spend in interest on our capital improvement projects from now to the year 2035. So, as I said at the meeting, the most valuable thing we as a city council can give to the future of Alexandria is the continuation of that perfect credit rating. So, I know Sarah and I, our colleagues on the council, and definitely the city manager and Morgan and the folks in our finance department take that very, very seriously and work very hard to follow very strict policies that govern when we can and can't do things
Mhm.
in terms of fiscal spending.
And I think one thing you'll see, we touched a little bit on the operating budget, in this conversation, and to sort of expand that into the CIP. One of the things we have to be aware of is not just what we're spending, but when we're spending it. And one thing we're keenly aware of right now is what's going on in FY29, FY30. Those are the years that things get the closest to our policy limits, essentially. If you have a credit card and it's got a $30,000 limit, those are the 2 years that sort of we're anticipating getting up to, and close to that line, but
Hmm.
not hitting it. And so what we have to do is manage how we're staging our projects based on what they cost, when they're expected to finish. It's a little bit like a game of Tetris, I think, as a city manager
Yes.
said last night during the work session. It's not just about how much you spend, but about when you spend it and when you pay it down. And one of the other interesting details I thought, we could share with our many listeners is our one of the ways that we have garnered and protected that AAA bond rating is our approach to debt payment. Is
Hmm.
we pay a 50-50 policy, basically. Every bit of debt that we take on, with every payment, we pay 50% of principal and 50% of the interest. Unlike sort of your typical mortgage, where there's often a difference over time. You're paying a small amount towards the principal and a large amount towards interest, and over time that starts to shift. But we take a very aggressive and consistent approach to paying down our principal, so that over time we are controlling the interest we are paying, and we are controlling the amount of debt that we are carrying. And it's a little dry, but it is policies like that have positioned us to borrow cheaply, cheaper than we might otherwise, which allows us to do more. I mean, $30 million saved on interest is pools and parks and roads and all these kinds of projects. I mean, some of the CIP projects happening and proposed in this budget are a modernization of the Old Town Pool, which has
Hmm.
not been modernized since the 1960s. So we're finally going to put some energy and some money into that, long overdue. Ewald Park out in the West End is slated for about $2 million of investment. And then there's other large projects like Cora Kelly and George Mason that we mentioned earlier. There's the City Hall renovation project. There's
Yep.
stormwater mitigation along the waterfront. So looking at our budget, and particularly looking at our CIP, again, you get a really nice long view of what's going on in the city, and what to keep an eye out for, and what DSUPs and SUPs will be coming forward in the months and years ahead.
Yeah. And to sort of go a bit broader, the budget isn't just about that bottom line number and the cuts that we took to get there. There's really good things in the draft budget. We are spending, over $350 million between ACPS, and all the other services that we provide to youth in Alexandria to make sure that the young people in our city have a great start in life. We have really great employees, and we've worked very hard to keep those employees here in Alexandria, providing services to our residents in a very, very competitive environment. And so that's been a council priority, is investing in our city workforce to make sure that you're getting the people running the parks, the people out there walking the streets as police officers, and cleaning up after snowstorms, to keep Alexandria running the way that we want. Our vacancy rate has fallen to 12% in the city, which is very low for this region. We have more than $30 million between dedicated funding and direct funding from our general fund into housing initiatives that include funding for affordable housing, dedicated buildings in Arlandria, rent supports for people who get a little bit behind and need some help staying in their homes so they don't become displaced, and other services like that. We also spend a lot of money with nonprofits in the city, helping them go further in the help they give Alexandrians. We have $500,000 in here for Alive, which is our food bank network here in the city. If you go to a house of worship in Alexandria, there's a good chance that your church or synagogue is a part of the Alive network that operates a food bank or helps provide meal services to people in need in our city. And we actually discovered during the pandemic that there was a huge spike in people who were coming to Alive for services. And then after the pandemic ended, it went down, but it didn't go all the way down.
Mhm.
Not because we left the pandemic in much worse shape than we entered it, but because there were so many people who needed these services before, but hadn't been connected with them. But the crisis of the pandemic brought them into connection with Alive, with DCHS, our Department of Human Services, and they're now getting the services they need. That has a cost to us, but it also has a benefit to us that the people in our city are better taken care of and are facing, less challenges in their life. We also, transit is a huge part of our city. It's the lifeblood of how we get around in this region. We have $134 million in our budget in our CIP for Dash and WMATA, our bus system and the train system that we rely on here in Alexandria. Those are increased commitments that we put in place over the last few years to make sure that we keep our buses fare free and keep WMATA operating in a challenging environment for transit services across the country.
Yeah, a little shout out to VRE as well.
Yes, yeah,
We do
yes,
we do
yes,
make our jurisdictional subsidy payment to VRE as well, which
yeah,
I'll just note provides a one seat ride straight into DC if you need to get to L'Enfant or to Union Station.
yeah.
It's a great choice as well. And just to pick
It
up,
is.
Kirk, I appreciate you sort of going through some of those big ticket items, but I think that $30 million figure that you mentioned for housing. I just want to circle back to it because I think housing, as you and I experienced during the campaign, housing was the conversation everywhere you went. It didn't matter if we were meeting with civic associations or youth groups or senior citizens. Everybody wanted to talk about housing. And I think it's worth, just circling back to that to point out that while often the big ticket items, building the Sansa and the Naja, 474, committed affordable units, is obviously important and a huge piece of it. We also this budget has $10.3 million in elderly and disabled tax relief and veteran tax relief. So the taxes that those individuals don't have to pay is essentially budgeted for in our budget. But it's a way for those individuals to stay in the city, and it's a part of the entire holistic housing program that we have.
Yeah,
Our
housing is the sine qua non of Alexandria. Nothing that we do for people who live in our city is possible if they cannot stay in our city. So
Right.
we work very hard. We make a real priority out of funding these important affordable housing projects.
Yeah, I mean, when you talk about food insecurity, one of the reasons why increased food insecurity is real is because people are spending more on housing cost. So it leaves less behind simply to cover the cost of food. So, we're spending a lot of time on it in this episode and in this moment because I think we appreciate how central it is to everybody's lives here in Alexandria. And I think as the budget process continues, you're going to hear increasing discussion on how housing affects, DCHS's work, our community and health services. You're going to hear about it in transportation and environmental services, what it means for parking. You're going to hear about it in parks, what it means for where we need parks, where we need rec centers, where we need to expand those programs. It's all about where people are living and what do they need in their neighborhoods. And so stay tuned throughout the rest of the upcoming budget process. Please come out to the dedicated public hearings on this topic. There's a special portal. I think it's alexandriava.gov/budget.
That's
Um,
it.
that's it. That will
Yep.
take you straight to the budget page where you can submit your comments, and you will
And you
also,
can read all the
yeah,
budget documents, all 750 pages of the operating budget, and who knows how many pages of the CIP.
and so it's not the only place where you can read about the budget, but you can also read council members' budget questions. I think my colleague, Mr. McPike here, has already submitted maybe 10 budget questions the minute we got started. But those questions are an insight into not only ideas, creative ideas about new programs, new opportunities, but there are also ways to look back on what have we done historically in an area? How have we taxed things? How have we expanded programs? So those questions are an opportunity to see what your council members are thinking about, what they want to know more about, and through the answers, we often end up with budget adds and deletes. Last year, a substantial add and delete I can think of, and I know my colleague's going to have others to mention, is there were questions asked about vacancy. in the city
Hmm.
and retention. And as a result of that answer, we crafted a $1.7 million, I think, ad
Yep.
to address retention bonuses, reassessing baseline salaries, to study retention policies. And that has worked in short. As Kirk mentioned, our vacancy rate is down, morale is up, and I think we responded to what we learned in response to that budget question.
Yeah. It's also important to note that the add delete process is how members of the council amend the manager's budget, to reflect things that we want to make sure are either in there or in some cases not in there. But we cannot put an add delete in unless we've asked a budget question about it and received a response, either at one of our budget work sessions or through this formal budget memo process. This ensures that there aren't big surprises late in the game in our budget process. Also, when putting an amendment into the budget, you need three members of council to sign on to that amendment. You need the author and two co-sponsors. That guarantees that anything that we're going to spend time discussing as a possible amendment to the budget is something that has a legitimate chance of actually being adopted. We have a lot of policies and procedures like this that have developed over the decades that really give us a thorough and effective budget process. And I hope that you will visit alexandriava.gov/budget and look at the list of the 17 remaining opportunities for you to watch or participate in the budget process. And let's put something together that we're all proud of in this very difficult time for our city. We have 13,000 federal employees in Alexandria.
Yeah.
This is obviously a difficult time to be an employee of the executive branch. And I know that I would like to see our budget process in Alexandria be a rock of stability in the lives of people who feel very at sea right now. And I think that the procedures we have in place will help us do that.
And if this podcast is launched in time, I will take this opportunity to mention that our Congressman Don Beyer is hosting sort of a federal resource opportunity session on March 8th at Wakefield High
Mm-hmm.
School, and it's designed essentially. The reason why we're very pleased to have Congressman Beyer leading that is because it's allowing all of the jurisdictions to participate, to send people over, and so if you are impacted in any way. By recent events. Feel free to visit that fair. It's on March 8th at Wakefield High School, and it's essentially a resource fair. It's not exclusively for jobs, but it's for all sorts of resources that you might need and information. And if you're looking for other things to do, maybe something to distract you from all that's recently going on, we do have another parade. Alexandria loves a parade. And so while I don't think this podcast will be out
Yeah,
quite
it
in
won't.
time, it won't, but I'll go ahead and mention it. There will be, we'll all be walking. I think Kirk, you'll be there with me
Absolutely. Wearing
yeah,
green. I am
wearing
the
green.
Irishman on council.
Yeah, so we'll be having our Ballyshaners parade this Saturday, March 1. Hopefully it did not rain. I mean, hopefully,
Yeah.
as I
You
say
will know.
this,
We don't.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
right. Were we out there in the rain? Let's hope not.
Yeah.
But Alexandria does love a parade, and we'll be participating in that this weekend. Anything else,
Yeah.
Kirk, we need to let our listeners know?
Nope. We had another parade this year, earlier this month. So thank you to the folks who put together the George Washington birthday parade. It was rainy, but it was fun, and people came out, and we put on a show. And we look forward to doing it again next year. And someday, I hope that this city, which was able to figure out how to do fare-free bus service, this city that is able to preserve our history while also serving people and the needs that they have currently, this city, which took a dilapidated waterfront and turned it into one of the best places in this region to go,
This
can
is quite a
figure out how
buildup,
to
folks.
have a parade that doesn't take place in the winter. It's
No, that's a bridge too far. It is true. We have three parades
and
all
they're
in the
all in the
winter.
winter. Why?
We're committed to the bit. We're committed to
I
the bit, my
guess.
man.
I guess.
Well, we hope you have enjoyed this thoroughly wonky, thoroughly detailed look back at this February's three city council meetings. Kirk and I look forward to chatting at you next month. We will record again after our March meetings. Please email us questions and let us know about guests or other things you'd like us to discuss in the podcast. Kirk, any other closing thoughts?
Yeah, you can reach me at kirk.mcpike@alexandriava.gov. Sarah's at sarah.bagley@alexandriava.gov. We hope you enjoyed the show. If you don't, we'll get better.
we,
But most importantly, we hope that you find it informative and that it improves your understanding of what we're doing in the city, why we're doing the things we're doing, and we look forward to continuing to having this conversation with you in the months ahead. So thank
yeah.
you for tuning in today.
Thank you. Be well, everybody.
And please subscribe.